It's time to get into the biggins. The offensive lineman in the 2023 NFL Draft, Matt Williamson's rankings of the top offensive tackles and the top interior offensive linemen in the 2023 class. Coming up on this episode of Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL on Twitter. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And Matt, it's time to dig into the offensive lineman, the all-important offensive lineman. I think the position group in the draft that people don't pay enough attention to pre-draft, and the offensive linemen always go higher, Matt, than they are projected coming into the weekend.
No doubt about it, especially tackles. It's a pretty good tackle class. You know, like I think most people, including myself, have Paris Johnson Jr. from Ohio State as a top guy. And he's not Orlando Pace, Jonathan Ogden. Actually, that's a quick side note. It seemed like when we were growing up, and I know I'm older than you, but when you and I both in our respective lifetimes started paying attention more and more to the draft, and I know you've been into it as, you know, probably from the same age I was, there always seemed like there was a top 5 tackle, and not all of them hit, but, you know, Eric Fisher and who was the Rams guy that tested like
Jason Smith? Was that his name?
Something Smith, yeah.
Right, yeah. And
you know,
tested off the charts and just disappeared.
It's terrible, right?
Yeah.
But there was Paces and Ogdens and Basellis. Like those guys don't seem to come in the league anymore as almost the no-brainer top 5 picks. But that aside, it's a pretty good tackle group.
You know, I think a lot of what happens now is the process has been sped up so much for prospects that.
Good point.
If you're Baselli, by the time you're a redshirt sophomore, it's like you're getting pushed into the draft, and that's it. And you haven't had that time to develop through your senior year and just be this monstrous beast of a player. And so, and then you have to do some learning on the run, and that's, you know, it works out sometimes, and sometimes I think it's a disaster for prospects coming out too soon. I think we see it a lot with quarterbacks as well, and you know, might be an issue in this class. And we see a lot of busts at quarterback, or the 1-year wonder types of quarterbacks. They just don't have the opportunity. That's why the Parcells thing rings out. I think it probably is important for offensive linemen too, just because there's so much. You have to be a grown man, and you have to. Your body has to develop and your mind has to develop. I think people don't realize how much smarts it takes to be a really good offensive lineman in the NFL.
And technique, which takes practice, even if you're Orlando Pace. You know, like all the reps you can get. Defensive linemen are just like velociraptors and just go get them, you know, and where O linemen have to be very precise and very technically sound and communicate, smart and tough. So let's get into this list here in a second, but a couple little instances from my background when I was with teams is the greatest thing I learned when I was a Brown scout was if you're an O lineman and you're smart and you're tough, and this is a Ravens thing, this is an Ozzie Newsome thing that they brought over to that you're almost impossible to get off the field. You're going to have a long career. You're going to be a millionaire if you're smart and you're tough, and at least you have the baseline athletic ability. That goes a long way. The year I was with the Browns, I also did a lot of pro work, and my job there was I had to have a grade at that point of everybody in your division, the NFC West. And that was Walter Jones and Orlando Pace in their prime. And I almost didn't even have to watch them. I mean, it was embarrassing that I would say 7 out of 10 games, whoever the pass rusher was going against those two in the second half just kind of stopped rushing the passer and just sort of hung out at the line of scrimmage. It really was true. I mean, it was like, I can't beat this guy.
That's phenomenal. Phenomenal. There might not be that guy in this class, but I think there's a couple players that could get closer to that. And I think a little bit more projection with this offensive line class. It's a good class. Yep. It's a deep class. Maybe nobody goes in the top 10, certainly no tackles in the top 5, but there's something to like about a lot of these guys. So who's your number one? I think you already teased it. It's Paris Johnson Jr. from Ohio State.
Yeah, and he's really good. I mean, he's the first tackle here. He's got ridiculously long arms. He's a very good athlete, but he's a 1-year starter at left tackle. I mean, at most schools, he'd be a 4-year starter or 3-year starter or whatever, but he bumped from guard to tackle, did it really well. But he's a little bit of a work in progress, too, in terms of technique and footwork and hand placement and all those things as well. If he busted, I would understand.
I really liked what I saw from Paris Johnson. I went through the tackles
Mhm.
recently, and I came away with Paris Johnson #1 because of the size, because of the athleticism, and he's not necessarily raw. I think he can get better, but
Yeah.
you just see the way he moves with his size and his length, and he's got some power element to his game, and
Yeah.
he just looks the part and ridiculously long. I think it's 36-inch arm length, right? At
Yep.
6'6", 313. He's the easiest projection, and I think he's closer to being that guy than maybe Broderick Jones is, who also has an equally high ceiling, might be even more athletic than Paris Johnson. And that's your #2 tackle in this class, Broderick Jones out of Georgia.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And what's funny is Georgia listed him at 6'4", and so I immediately thought, yeah, of course, everyone goes, is he going to be a guard? He doesn't play anything like a guard, but he's actually 6'5". He came in taller than what the Georgia program had him at.
Yeah.
He runs really well. He's really good downfield. He still has technical work to do too, but he's got a good base. His combine was really impressive with like mirror drills and bag work and stuff like that. Acceleration,
He tested really well for 9'7". Anytime you're 6'5", 311 pounds, and you're going sub 5 seconds, that's where the real athletes are. And I think a lot of times we talk about this a lot is the testing numbers of the combine more important for offensive linemen, as odd as it seems, than wide receivers and such. So I love seeing that from Broderick Jones. The thing that jumps out to me with Broderick Jones is how good he moves with his lower half and lowering his hips and getting down in his stance. And that's something really rare for a long, tall offensive tackle. So he moves like a much smaller man, but he's big and athletic and, somewhat raw. And there's more technique work to do for him than maybe Paris Johnson, even though they both have, very high upsides and there's some bust potential there, but a lot to like about both of those guys. I think even more boomer bust with Broderick Jones, and he can end up being the best in this class. And I wouldn't be shocked by it in a few years.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth there. That I think if he hits, he would be #1 in this class. Like his ceiling is incredibly high. I'm glad you mentioned his lower half because I was really shocked. And that's why drill work's important, how the stuff they had him do. But his feet are always very wide apart. He's got a really great base, knee bend, sinks his butt. You never see his feet get close together, and he pulls it off. I mean, anyone can walk around with their feet really wide, but being able to move and move that way was really impressive for him. So he's got a lot of upside. Yes.
And I think, there might be some teams like Jones more, but Paris Johnson Jr., Broderick Jones, they're for sure tackles and they're for sure first rounders, no matter what order you like them in. It gets a little difficult there after those two tackles, especially with one offensive tackle that might be a tackle that might not be a tackle. So before we get to that player, who's your #3 tackle in this class?
Yeah, I went with Darnell Wright from Tennessee, and I think he's really starting to grow on me. I thought he was a top 50 pick when I started to do my homework on him, started to learn the name. Now I'm pretty certain he's going to be a first-round pick, maybe top 25, maybe even the top 20. What's interesting, and this is a different conversation altogether, but the whole right tackle versus left tackle thing to me is a thing of the past. Like it used to be put the big masher at right tackle. Well, that guy has to deal with Bosa and Watt, and it's no easier on the right side.
No.
However,
a right-handed quarterback just gets to see him coming a little easier. That's
right. I mean, it's not like all the edge rushers come off the blind side now. They come from everywhere, and everyone has a bunch of them. But this guy played much, much better on the right. And it's not because he's a masher, which he is, but I think he's just a lot more comfortable with his technique on the right side than the left. So that worries me a little. Like, keep him on the right.
I was going to bring up the left tackle, right tackle thing, but I still think there's something to it, and there's something to where you're going to get drafted because the first two guys are left tackles, and this next group of your top 5 is probably right tackles. So there is still a difference to NFL people.
And the next guy is like the epitome of the old school right tackle, and that's DeJuan Jones from Ohio State. I mean, 6'8", 374, the biggest human being you've ever seen. But everyone said the same thing about Orlando Brown, or, because you're huge, you have to be a right tackle. And he's like, no, I'm more comfortable on the left. Jones played the right for Ohio State because Johnson's on the left. But I talk about this a lot because I think the Steelers might take one of these guys. That if you took DeWan Jones and put him in as a 6th offensive lineman in week 1 and start teaching him left tackle, I'm sure he could figure it out. I don't think it's impossible.
If you can pass protect, then what's the difference if you're a right tackle? You're not too big to be left tackle if you can do the things that another left tackle would be doing anyway.
Yeah, and the thing why I mentioned it with Wright is we saw both, and he was just a lot clunkier with his footwork, his hands on the left the year before than he was on the right. I mean, so if it's a technique thing, like, hey, I only like playing the right, and I guess Orlando Brown was that guy. He said, hey, I'm a left tackle. That's what I've done my whole life, and just because I'm big, you guys stick me on the right side, but I feel like I'm playing backwards, So it depends on the human being, but just because you're big and ginormous does not mean you have to be right only, in my opinion, in today's NFL.
With DeWan Jones out of Ohio State, 6'8", 374 pounds. I mean, he's huge.
He's huge.
My comp for him has been Trent Brown in the NFL.
Good one. Yeah.
I think he went in the 7th round because everyone's like, he's too big. He can't move. He's not going to be an offensive tackle. But he's so long and had these ridiculous long arms. And you just have to orbit him. He's so long. And he started out playing right tackle in the NFL, and he ended up playing left tackle in the NFL too. So I think I could see DeWan Jones being that type of player.
Yeah. And who was the Falele from Minnesota last year? He was the guy I was talking about. Boy, he's the biggest guy I've ever seen, blah, blah, blah. And you watch him in drills or at the Senior Bowl and you say, ooh, I mean, he's on the ground a lot. He's too heavy. He's not light on his feet. Where this guy, in or out of pads, you watch him and say, ooh, he's a more gifted athlete than Falele was, without question.
Matt Williamson's number 5 offensive tackle in the 2023 class. Some honorable mentions who just missed the list, who could surprise on draft day. And then we'll get into the interior offensive linemen as well next. Today's episode of P&W is brought to you by Built Bar. This March, and we're at the end of March, it's Built March Madness bracket time. You don't have much time to get in and vote for your favorite flavor of Built Bar. Go to builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. You'll know I'll be voting for the peanut butter flavor. There's bars, there's puffs. If you like the marshmallowy puffs, there's a ton of those in the bracket as well. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff at builtmarchmadness.com, you get put into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners, 50, will get a free box of Built Bars. Not only that, one lucky Locked On listener will get a 12-month subscription to Built and have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You got to try Built Bars. They are the best protein bar ever. They are ridiculous, high in protein, 17 grams of protein in most Built Bars, but only 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar in most Built Bars. They're amazing. You won't think they're good for you, but they are. And most Built Bars covered in 100% real chocolate. So run to builtmarchmadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. Matt, who is your number 5 offensive tackle in the 2023 NFL draft class? Going through these real quick. Paris Johnson Jr. of Ohio State is number 1. Broderick Jones from Georgia, number 2. Darnell Wright, Tennessee, 3. DeWan Jones, Ohio State, 4. Number 5 is?
Anton Harrison from Oklahoma. And he's more of the typical left tackle type. I mean, I always hate to call any of these dudes finesse players because they could throw me, stick me in the locker and I'd never come out,
I said that a lot. I was talking about Devon Achane, the 180-pound running back who ran a 4.3 and was like, he can't run through a piece of paper. But if he tried to run through me right now, I'd be on the ground and I'd be in pain, right? but as far as NFL players go and projections, yeah.
And I like Harrison a lot. He is a little more finesse type, light feet, more protector than Mauler. And if somebody liked him better than DeWan Jones, I would 100% understand it. I mean, maybe a high passing volume team looks at him and says, we'll take Harrison before Jones. They're very different.
Who are the honorable mentions for you in this offensive tackle class? Because we talked about how deep it was. And at the combine, there was a lot of length, a lot of athleticism there. It seems like I keep seeing names of guys that I see. I'm like, this guy could potentially be a starting offensive tackle in the NFL. So there might be guys down into all the way through day 2, really, of some really good offensive linemen.
I bet when we look back at this class, we'll see even 3rd, 4th round guys that didn't play at all their rookie year that develop. There's some athletes at this position that hopefully go to a situation where they can kind of learn, put on a few pounds. But Matthew Bergeron from Syracuse was easily my honorable mention. Like, I wanted to get him in the top 5. He's coming on strong. He's a thickly built guy. He's that typical one where, boy, if he was a guard, he would grade better, but you have to, every Sunday there's 64 starting tackles in the league. He probably won't get he's probably going to be one of them because there's really only 40 human beings on the planet that are, quote, pure tackles, and he's close enough, but he's a big, thick dude, and he moves well enough, for my opinion. I like Bergeron a lot.
In your write-up here, and by the way, where can folks find these, the text version of these top 5s for you for the NFL draft, Matt?
Steelers.com. I mean, not a hard thing to find. Pretty easy website, and even you Raven fans and Browns fans are allowed to go there and click on it if you like.
I don't know if you want that in your browser history, but
right. But it's called a triple take. There's 3 of us. We all do our top 5, and then we actually do a video. We have like this big board like Vanna White, and I take Broderick Jones and I move them from 3 up to 2, and so it's been fun. Every Tuesday we've been recording those.
So if you want the text companion, Steelers.com, you can find a lot of other Matt Williamson work as well. You mentioned here, worth considering, was BYU's Blake Freeland. And he's a player I've talked a lot about on Locked On 49ers because, as you know, the 49ers don't have a first
he would fit you
or
guys.
or their own 3rd round pick. So 99 is where the 49ers pick. And Niners need an offensive tackle. So we're talking about prospects like Blake Freeland. And I put on the tape for Blake Freeland after his ridiculous combine. And he didn't make he's getting mocked in that area. He didn't make the top 100 on Dane Brugler of the Athletics top 100 that just came out yesterday that I was looking at. So maybe he does get there, but man, when you see a prospect who's 6'8", 302 pounds, now he's a little bit thin in the lower half, and maybe he does need a year of weight room from the NFL. But when you move like Blake Freeland can, and you see it on tape, and you saw it at the combine, it was unbelievable. The combine, 6'8", 302, 34-inch arms, big 10-inch hands. He was 4.98 in the 40, 1.68 10-yard split, 37-inch vertical, 10-foot broad jump. I mean, he was near or at the top of every single testing number. And when you have that sort of athleticism at that size, offensive line coaches and teams are going to salivate. And I'm looking at him being outside of the top 100, and I'm like, no way. I bet there's a better chance he's closer to the 1st round than pick 100. But
exactly.
So it's one of those players that don't be shocked when some of these super athletic, when you play the Power 5 conference schedule, and if you meet the height, weight, speed requirements as a legit starting caliber edge or offensive tackle, you're going to go high. I think some of these guys are going to go higher than people expect.
100%. There's no question. He's a perfect example. Like, I don't think your Niners have any shot unless they trade up. I mean, he may go the end of round 2 to the Chiefs or Bills or, an established team that can kind of bring him along slow. And a note about Freeland I think is interesting is almost all their guys, especially O linemen, come out and they're like 25 years old with a kid. And, he's not, he's younger, he's a normal aged prospect.
So I think a lot of people listening to this podcast are probably wondering, well, where the heck is Peter Skoronski? And since he didn't show up in your offensive tackle rankings, Matt, that tells me he must be number 1 on your interior offensive line rankings.
Yeah, and I was trying to cheat the system a little bit because when I did this, I turned in tackles first. So I thought I might have a harder time coming up with 5 quality interior dudes. So let's move Skoronski there. And he would clearly be 1. He doesn't have to fight with the Ohio State dude and Jones for the number 1 tackle spot. So I thought it was a little cleaner. And it is. I mean, if you call him a guard, he's clearly number 1 in this class to me of all interior linemen. But then I had to leave some good guys off that I didn't want to.
So let me ask you this before we talk about it. So Peter Skoronski, Northwestern, 6'4", 313. The real question is can he play tackle in the NFL? He's got 32-inch arms and, sub 33-inch and really sub 34-inch is where teams want to be with their starting offensive tackles in the NFL. So, might be eye of the beholder. I am confident, and I think you did the right thing putting him at guard. I think that's where you can project and be like, look, all pro guard. Let's go. Put him at left guard. Let him go for a decade. You're fine. You don't have to worry about it. Some teams might try him at tackle. My question to you, Matt, before we go through the rest of the interior offensive line rankings is, you have a blank team. You're rebuilding. You have 0 offensive linemen. Do you take Skoronski first, or do you take one of the tackles first?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to bring up the Titans, which I think are pretty close to fitting that that draft, to be honest with you. I mean, I look at the Titans O-line and think they need 3 starters, or maybe even the Bears. Like, they're starting to put some things together, but it really could use help anywhere. And I know I always bring this back to the Steelers, but the Steelers signed 3 guards. So now, to me, Skoronski's not in play, because if you only need a tackle, like I think the Steelers do, sorry, he's not going to be there anyway. But so, yes, if I had nothing, Skoronski would be my first offensive lineman off the board.
He's just easy. It's like,
he's going to hit.
He's not going to bust. And he might be left tackle, right? But
right.
At worst, he's going to be a really, really good guard for a really long time. I get blown away watching Skoronski, how easy it is for him to just turn guys. It's like, he's not supposed to be that easy. It's like he's driving a car. It's like, oh, this is the guy I'm blocking. Cool. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn you sideways, and my running back's going to have a huge lane. I don't know how he's so good at doing that. It's unbelievable. It's one of the best I've ever seen, just being able to turn guys' shoulders in a 90-degree direction when they're not trying to get turned 90 degrees.
Yeah, I think he's the best blocker in this draft. So therefore, if I had needs across the board, I'm just taking him. He's at least a double. He might be Zach Martin home run.
And I think a lot of people, it probably drives them crazy. And I'm like, I've gone through this so much with the draft, and before I was a little bit more cynical about it, and I kind of understand a little bit more now. And I get why length is so important to GMs and scouts, but it seems insane. If he had 33-inch arms, we'd probably have him in the tackle group, right?
It's 1 inch,
but it's 32, and I think it's 32 and a quarter, 32 and an eighth, or whatever. So like less than an inch arm length, and we're like, nope, guard.
Exactly.
It is pretty wild.
It is pretty wild, and we might regret that. He might be a long-term. There's guys like Kelvin Beachum. He's still playing. He's like 15-year NFL starter that was a 7th-round pick. That probably would have been a 3rd-round pick if his arms were an inch longer, but he's made it work, All
right, next, let's get through the rest of the interior offensive line class. I think there's a big gap between Peter Skoronski and the rest of Matt Williamson's top 5 and honorable mention interior offensive linemen next. Today's episode of Peacock Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel. The tournament heating up, no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. That's because right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. You can then wager on everything. We're talking about money line bets, point spreads, which team will be cutting down the net at the tourney. Tons of prop bets throughout the college tournament, NBA, NHL getting close to the playoffs, Major League Baseball. Happy opening day yesterday for the Major League Baseball fans out there. You got that every day, all summer long now at FanDuel. And, of course, those tasty draft props, which are also growing at FanDuel. So don't miss your shot at a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Who is the second best interior offensive lineman in this 2023 class, man?
These next two, I think, have a strong case. I went with John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota. Kind of talking out both sides of my mouth. I think there's 2 legit starting centers in this class. Michael Schmitz and Joe Tippmann from Wisconsin, who comes in 4 on my list. And then there's a big drop-off for centers. Like, I think there's 2 guys that'll be starters. Schmitz, to me, is a little more sturdy, was really impressive at the Senior Bowl. But really, these next 5, I could see any order, just depending what scheme you play. I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself, but Osiris Torrance from Florida could easily be second on this list if you want just to mash people. I mean, he's an old school, wide body, bad tester, like all big fat guards, that, and just kills people, Just depends what you're looking for. But I like Michael Schmitz a lot.
And a guy like Osiris Torrance, I mean, we saw last year with some offensive linemen that maybe went a little bit higher than people thought, even the guards in that class. And so Osiris Torrance could definitely be one of those. He's number 3 on your list here out of Florida, 6'5", 330 pounds. But I want to go back to number 2, John Michael Schmitz out of Minnesota, 6'3.5", 301 pounds, athletic, center. He's exactly what you envision a center to be like, maybe a little undersized compared to some guards on the offensive line, not the biggest, longest guy, but gets out of his stance really well, can get to the second level and block people. And it's funny because some players, and I think, Cole Strange was one of those last year. Zion Johnson especially is one of those last year. You go to the Senior Bowl, and when every single person there, every draftnik, every scout, every blogger that's there is like, well, the best player here might be John Michael Schmitz. You're going to make yourself a whole lot of money. And I think he did at the Senior Bowl.
Yep. And we opened the show by one of my lessons learned: tough and smart. He's tough and smart.
Yep.
He'll be a 10-year starter unless he gets hurt,
So we're talking three very different players already, with Skoronski, 6'4", 313 is your number one interior offensive lineman. John Michael Schmitz, 6'3.5", 301, center, your number two. Osiris Torrance, guard, big, 6'5", 30 pounds heavier than John Michael Schmitz, is your number three offensive lineman in this class. So all three very different guys, and, we're talking about potentially very different positions for those three players in the NFL. Who's your number four offensive lineman in this class?
Another guy that's very different than the first three. I mean, he's a 6'6" center from Wisconsin, Joe Tippmann. I mean, those guys rarely work out. Like Ethan Posick's really playing well for the Browns right now. They look almost lean if you lined up all 32 centers in the league. The 6'6", 313 guy kind of looks like more of a power forward. There's not much fat on their body, kind of built like a tackle, long arms. And rarely do I see it, and he doesn't face Chris Jones and Jeffrey Simmons, those guys yet, but I don't see guys getting under his pads and just driving them back. And by center standards, he runs like a deer. I mean, it wouldn't shock me if he had the athleticism to play tackle on a pitch.
We got a small school guy here showing up at number 5 on your list, Matt. Cody Mock out of North Dakota State, 6'5", 302. I think he's missing a tooth. He's like,
he is.
You're like, oh, right. You don't even need to see the rest of his body. You see his headshot. You're like, well, I know that guy's an offensive lineman.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way, he's like Skoronski. I mean, he's 6'5", but he's a little short-armed. He did some center stuff at the combine or at the Senior Bowl as well. At North Dakota State, he's going to be a tackle, of course. Right. In the pros, I thought he's a pretty easy projection to guard. There was a handful of guys, though, fighting for that last spot. And it kind of just is eye of the beholder. I mean, I had a really hard time leaving Steve Avila from TCU off because he's a lot more of the Osiris Torrance, mash your face, 330-pound type dude. So if somebody liked Avila more than Mock, I would 100% understand.
And even though they're similar for height and weight with Cody Mock and Peter Skoronski, I think with Cody Mock that it was easier just saying you're a straight up interior offensive lineman. Same arm length, 32 and 3/8 inch arms, 6'5", 302. He had good, not great athleticism and workout with the timing numbers, 5:08, 40-yard dash for Mock. Much slower 10-yard split than some of the other faster. So more of a build-up speed offensive lineman, with the way he moves. 29-inch vertical, 7.333 cone, 4.55 short shuttle, which is pretty good. And I think that's one of the telling. I think short shuttle is almost, if I had to go to one thing with offensive linemen, I think 40 is usually pretty good as well. But short shuttle might be the one testing number I want to look for with my offensive lineman. And his was good.
It's a kind of amazing to me. I'm glad you brought up the short shuttle conversation because that's one of the first things I look at when I get home from Indianapolis and start studying numbers is interior O-line short shuttles, because the guys that are best in class there almost always exceed their draft slot. There's so many examples of dudes and be like, why does it matter if a 310-pound guard can tap one line, go the other side, change directions? Well, you got to realize many, many times they're at the second level trying to block a linebacker who's not just standing still for them, or Aaron Donald's going to outquick them or go to a cross move across their face and they got to change directions. So if you look at short shuttle times, it's a really good indicator of guys that won't bust and exceed their draft slot. And I said there's only 2 centers in this draft, but Ohio State's Luke Whippler is probably the clear third. He could be a starter. He did really well in the short shuttle. And the guard from UCLA, John Gaines, had kind of a historically good combine, but especially short shuttle. Pay attention to John Gaines from UCLA.
So I'm kind of keeping score here, Matt. Jackson Smith and Jigba wide receiver. Next year, top 5 wide receiver, Marvin Harrison Jr. First round left tackle, Paris Johnson Jr. First round right tackle, DeJuan Jones. Luke Whippler at center, CJ Stroud had a lot of help on offense at Ohio State.
He did.
Should we kind of slow down on the CJ Stroud #1 overall quarterback? Because I mean, it's crazy. I mean,
it's remarkable. And he's not playing Georgia. I mean, he's not in the SEC either. Like, hey, Michigan's a tough game. Georgia's a tough game, but Illinois and Indiana and Northwestern are
have worse players on his NFL offense than his college offense.
Very, very, very possible. Especially
a wide receiver. You're talking about 2 top 15 picks.
Yes. And from what I understand, the dude that's lining up next to Harrison next year is also projected to be a late first. I don't know who he is. The guys that left were first, of course.
Yeah.
I'm sure they have a running back. He's probably
no doubt
19 years old or something. Right. And there's just somebody waiting in line. I mean, Paris Johnson Jr. couldn't play left tackle for them last year because he wasn't ready yet, so they probably have someone just like him who's better.
One more honorable mention here, and that was a guy who was a college tackle that projects inside as well, who you mentioned in your write-up, Tyler Steen out of Alabama, who's a player I like a lot. He just doesn't fit really the length profile for a projection to offensive tackle, but he's a really good player, and someone's going to get a nice little player there on day 2 probably.
He's a longtime starter at Bama. That's either a guard or a tackle or something. I think he's a tough, smart guy as well. Saban loved him. Not the most talented guy in the league, but perfect example of I would be shocked if he busts. And injuries aside, a decade from now, we'll be like, oh, Tyler Steen just retired. He had a really good career, and he's got $40 million in the bank.
It may be too early, but is there a Cole Strange that everyone's like, okay, he went 2 rounds higher than in any mock draft, and goes late round 1?
Probably. I mean, I have some dudes I like down the road, but I don't have the crystal ball to pick that guy. I mean, it
might actually be Blake Freeland that we talked about a little bit earlier. One of the guys that matches up athletically, or someone you just start checking boxes in the postseason, right? So someone like Cole Strange is like, okay, so he's athletically a dude that you could project to be a starting caliber dude. He was awesome at the Senior Bowl. So it's kind of like John Michael Schmitz, if he wasn't already being mocked so high. That's kind of what Cole Strange was last year. He just didn't get the credit for it in advance like John Michael Schmitz is. So maybe Cole Strange crawled so John Michael Schmitz could run.
There you go. And Quinn Meinert's before him, these tiny school dudes. Yeah,
Although, John Michael Schmitz went to Minnesota, and that could be the difference between, a small school guy or, a Power 5 conference guy.
Mm-hmm. And the draft process has gotten so cool now. I mean, it's hard to find sleepers. Like everyone thought Meinert's was a sleeper, Strange was a sleeper. They went in the top 50. They just went to small schools. One name I wanted to throw out there, a very good tester who I didn't know before the combine, is Utah Braden Daniels. He's another one that's probably a tackle, athletic enough, but probably could certainly bump into guard. I bet he sticks and goes a little. When he goes on day 2, I bet there'll be people, some of our listeners going, who's Braden Daniels from Utah? I think line coaches will want to get their hands on him.
Yeah, exactly. That's projectable, got all the athleticism, and offensive line coach is going to say, right or wrong, they're going to look at him and say, I can work with that guy. I can make him into a player. Yeah. And sometimes that's when teams get into trouble as well. But like great testing for Braden Daniels, 6'4", 294, a little light, right? But 33-inch arms, 4.99 in the 40, 4.6, 4 shuttle. So short shuttle. So yeah, that's a good one too.
Maybe he's a Niner.
I can see the fit. The Niners been getting a little bit bigger on the offensive line recently. So
that's true.
Things up. I don't know. We'll see. But he's that classic West Coast offense sort of
guy.
Zone, really, a little bit light but athletic offensive tackle. Braden Daniels. I could absolutely see him going higher than people project.
Yep.
Good Fantastic stuff from Matt Williamson. You can find more at Steelers.com. And of course, you will get more of us every single day here covering the draft, the rest of free agency, trades, everything going on in the NFL every single day. Thanks for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. Make sure you are subscribed up to the brand new YouTube channel for Peacock and Williamson. Hit the thumbs up and the like and the
all that
bell
jazz.
Notification and all of those things, and check out everything else going on at the network. Locked On NFL Draft, the new Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, and of course,
I was hanging with your boy Q at Radio Row, by the way. Yeah, he was set up. There you go.
Locked On Raiders. Yeah, fantastic stuff there. So, and your team is covered right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Matt and I back Monday right here. Peacock and Williamson.